You've been comfortable for a while now, maybe a few years, maybe longer than you want to admit. And the thing nobody warned you about comfort is that it doesn't feel like danger. It feels like reward. It feels like you earned this. The mortgage on a house in a safe neighborhood. The job that pays enough and doesn't demand too much. The relationship that settled into a rhythm. The evenings that end the same way. The weekends that blur together into something you can't quite distinguish from the one before. You're not suffering. You're not even unhappy in any definable way, but there's something, a pull, a restlessness, a quiet voice that gets louder on Sunday nights that you've been learning to ignore. Because ignoring it is easier than hearing what it's saying. What it's saying is, you're disappearing. Not dramatically, not catastrophically, but steadily, reliably in the specific way that men disappear when they stop encountering resistance, when the world stops pushing back and they stop having to push back against it. This is the most dangerous thing that can happen to a man. Not pain, not failure, not loss, ease, because ease over time doesn't rest you. It softens you. It erodes the edges that defined you. It makes the version of yourself that could do hard things a memory instead of a present reality. And the worst part, the part that makes this so insidious, is that it happens in the absence of any single decision. You don't decide to become less. You simply stop deciding to become more. Think about Ryan, 39. Software architect at a mid-sized company, 9 years in the same role, not because he couldn't advance, but because advancing required risk, and risk required a level of discomfort he'd stopped being willing to tolerate. Ryan was, by all external markers, fine. More than fine. House paid down to 40% of its value. Kids in a good school. Wife happy with the stability. Health not great, but not a problem he had to solve today. Ryan told his friend during a hike, the one hike he still made himself do, mostly out of guilt, that he felt like he was watching his life through glass. Present, but not participating. Safe, but not alive. His friend said, "That's just what this stage of life feels like." Ryan accepted that answer for 2 more years. The answer was wrong. There's a concept in neuropsychology called the challenge-skill balance. The principle, developed by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi in his research on flow states, that humans experience their highest engagement, their clearest sense of purpose, and their deepest satisfaction when they're operating at the edge of their current capability, not beyond it, in a way that produces anxiety, not beneath it, in a way that produces boredom, exactly at the edge, where the outcome is uncertain, where it requires something from you. When men eliminate challenge systematically, when they optimize their lives for comfort and eliminate the sources of friction and resistance, they don't experience peace. They experience the opposite. A low-grade disconnection from themselves that no amount of leisure can relieve, because the brain wasn't built for leisure, it was built for engagement. And when engagement disappears from a man's life, the brain interprets the absence as threat, not immediately, not obviously, but persistently. Ryan's Sunday evenings were the brain speaking. The problem wasn't that Ryan's life was bad. It was that his life had stopped requiring anything from him, and a man who nothing requires anything from slowly stops being a man that anything requires anything from. That's not a crisis, it's a calibration failure. And calibration can be corrected. Before we go further, that recognition you're having right now, that sense that comfort has quietly become your ceiling rather than your floor, that's the exact place the Untamed Mind protocol was designed for. The ebook names the 4 sabotage patterns the mind uses, but the one that's operating here is the most invisible. The comfort pattern, where ease is rationalized as virtue and stagnation is dressed up as stability. The daily performance dashboard creates daily structure around 3 priorities and an evening reflection. Not to fill your time, but to create the intentional challenge that comfort has removed. And the audio works in the minutes before your mind gets colonized by the day's demands, rebuilding the identity underneath the behavior. 3 tools, 1 system, $9. Link in the description. The problem isn't comfort itself. The problem is comfort with no flaw. Now, what actually breaks this pattern? Not a drastic change, not quitting the job, selling the house, and reinventing yourself from scratch. Those are fantasies that feel like answers and function like evasion. The actual mechanism is smaller, more specific, and significantly more demanding. It's the deliberate, regular introduction of difficulty into a life that has been systematically optimized to avoid it. The first piece is what I call the edge practice. One thing done regularly, where failure is genuinely possible, not where you might feel uncomfortable, where you might fail visibly without being able to rationalize it away. This could be a competitive sport where the scoreboard is honest, a skill you're learning that doesn't care about your status or your salary, where the feedback is immediate and indifferent. A physical challenge that makes demands your body genuinely can't meet without adaptation. The point of the edge practice isn't mastery. The point is to consistently encounter a version of yourself that hasn't been softened by comfort, to feel regularly the specific texture of being challenged, because that texture is what reminds the brain that you're still capable of responding to difficulty, that you haven't fully calcified into the comfortable version. Ryan started jiu-jitsu at 39. He was the oldest white belt in the room by 12 years. He was terrible at it. He got submitted by a 17-year-old on his 4th class and walked out of the room thinking about quitting. He didn't. And what he discovered over the following months wasn't that he became good at jiu-jitsu. It was that the Sunday evening stopped feeling like dread. Not because his life changed, because he had something in his life where the outcome wasn't guaranteed, where he had to show up as something more than reliable. The second piece is intentional exposure to failure, which sounds counterintuitive for men who've built stable lives specifically to avoid it. But failure, in controlled doses, in chosen contexts, is one of the most powerful recalibrators available to a human being. Because failure reminds you of 2 things simultaneously: that you're still capable of risking something and that you can survive the outcome when it doesn't go your way. Men who have been comfortable for years often discover that their fear of failure has grown in proportion to the time since they last experienced it. Not because the failure would be catastrophic, usually it wouldn't be, but because the untested imagination inflates the threat to fill the space that experience used to occupy. When Ryan was submitted in that jiu-jitsu class, he expected to feel humiliated. What he felt was relief. The thing he'd been afraid of had happened, and he was still standing. And that relief, the specific relief of discovering that failure isn't as fatal as comfort would have you believe, recalibrated something that 2 years of Sunday dread couldn't touch. The third piece is what I call public commitment with real stakes, announcing something you intend to do in a context where people will notice if you don't do it. Not on social media, where the stakes are essentially zero. In a room with people whose opinion of you matters. This could be registering for a race and telling people you're running it, committing to a creative project and giving it a deadline that other people are holding you to. Starting something that has a visible outcome, one that will exist or not exist in a way that can't be quietly revised. This matters because comfort without accountability is self-reinforcing. The comfortable man always has a reason why right now isn't quite the right time, why next month makes more sense, why this specific challenge is the one he'll defer and replace with something more reasonable. The comfortable man is a gifted negotiator with himself, about himself. Public commitment removes the negotiation. When other people know, the cost of not doing it is real, not theoretical. And real cost is the only thing that reliably overrides the comfort reflex. Ryan registered for a half marathon. hadn't run more than 4 miles in 3 years, told his wife, his 2 closest friends, and his colleagues at work. Then ran the half marathon in a time that was, by any objective measure, slow, and stood at the finish line, tired, genuinely exhausted in a way he hadn't been in years, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt like himself, not the comfortable version, the version that something was required of. But here's the moment where most men undermine everything they've built. 6 months in, the edge practice is established, the failure has been survived, the commitment has been kept, and then something changes. Life gets busy, the pace picks up. The edge practice starts to feel like just another obligation, and obligations, when you're tired, get rationalized down. I've been consistent for 6 months. I can take a break. And the break becomes 2 weeks, and 2 weeks becomes the return to the baseline. And the Sunday evenings start whispering again. This is not weakness. This is the pull of homeostasis, the body and mind's tendency to return to what's familiar, what's stable, what doesn't require energy. The way to handle this specific moment is not to push harder. It's to shrink the practice to something that can't be rationalized down to 0. Not the full workout, 5 minutes of movement. Not the full practice, 1 drill done in the living room. Not the full commitment, a text to the friend who's holding you to it. Did the minimum today, still here. Because the goal isn't peak performance. The goal is continuity, and continuity is maintained not by heroic effort on the hard days, but by making the practice small enough that there's no version of the day where it doesn't fit. Ryan missed 3 weeks of jiu-jitsu during a work sprint. He did not quit. He showed up on the 4th week and was submitted faster than usual. He took it. He went back the following week, and the following. Comfort is not the enemy. Comfort with no edge is. The man who lives entirely in comfort doesn't fail dramatically. He fades, gradually, reliably, until one day he looks up and realizes the version of himself that was capable of real things is somewhere behind him, in a time when the world still required something. You don't have to abandon the stability you built. You have to add the edge, the stability removed. Not because it makes you more productive, because it makes you more present, more awake, more like the person you'd recognize as yourself. Ryan now has a list of 3 things in his life where failure is possible. Jiu-jitsu, a business idea he's been developing for 8 months, a physical challenge he completes every quarter, different each time, always at the edge of what he knows he can do. His Sunday evenings are different now, not because his life is dramatically different, because he is. Drop edge in the comments if you made it this far. If this channel gives you something the standard self-improvement world doesn't, an honest examination of what's actually happening underneath the surface, subscribe to the Untamed Mind community, not for motivation, for the specific kind of clarity that only comes from looking directly at the thing you've been looking around. The most dangerous thing in your life isn't the hard parts, it's the parts that stopped being hard. Ryan figured that out at 39. You're figuring it out now. That's the edge. You stayed this far, not because you had spare time, because something in this video rang true enough to make the discomfort worth it. That's rare, and it's exactly the kind of person the Untamed Mind protocol was built for. The ebook will show you, with clinical precision, how your mind creates the conditions where you never start, and what to do differently tomorrow morning. The dashboard gives you the daily system to turn what you understood into real behavior. Intention, priorities, focus, habits, reflection. The audio goes where knowledge doesn't reach. The first 20 minutes of the day, when the subconscious is still open. Link in the description. The question isn't whether you're going to reclaim the edge. It's when you're going to stop calling the place you settled your destination.